Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 to have a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. Today we'll be having a look at the Tier 6 light premium cruiser, the München. For this review, I'll start with some history, move into analysis, then we'll discuss commanders, run down the stats, and finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around at all, you should see some time codes down in the description to help you out. If anyone remembers my history of the Siegfried, some of this may sound a little similar in the history of the München. The M-class cruiser, of which the München is our representation in World of Warships, was envisioned to be part of the ambitious and ultimately largely unfulfilled Plan Z. The M-class cruisers were intended to be simply long-range, high-speed cruisers used in commerce raiding. The design would build off of Germany's experience with the Leipzig class, which we have in-game as the Nuremberg. The ships were designed to have an arrangement of 8 15-centimeter guns, or in naval terms, very nearly 6-inch guns. For the eagle-eyed among you, the turrets on this ship may look familiar. They are indeed the same turret designs used on the Bismarck as her secondary arrangement by design. This arrangement would have been heavy enough armament to be considered formidable for convoys guarded by light cruisers, destroyers, or even smaller escorts including corvettes or frigates. Her armor was intended to be effective against ships with similar 6-inch guns or smaller. With a design speed of 35.5 knots, she'd also be fast enough to likely outrun anything larger in most sea conditions, and theoretically capable, therefore, of refusing any such engagement. All of this was intended to fit into an 8,000-ton displacement, and the ships have some pretty obvious design flaws. One being that both of her engines were in the same compartment, which is typically not done because you don't want one shot or a bit of water in the wrong part of your boat taking out all the power in your ship. The other was that the cruiser had a very limited heavy AA, and the design of the ship offered really no room to upgrade that. And for what it's worth, the version of the ship that we have in game seems to have noticeably more light AA than the historic M-class design, though it is still not considered a very formidable AA ship on the PC. The ship itself was also not large enough to accommodate as many people as would be necessary to crew a ship on a lengthy operation, and couldn't quite reach the level of protection requested within the tonnage allotted. In short, they were asking for too much out of this modest-sized cruiser. In spite of this, 2 hulls were laid down as the Plan 1938 cruisers, named M and N. They were to be the first of a series of 6. However, as the faults with the design became more apparent, one of which is indeed the strangely shaped citadel, the weight increased by another 500 tons, so the last 2 ships of the class were ultimately revised, those being cruisers Q and R. Ultimately, though, this project was abandoned in September 1939, both hulls were scrapped, and so none of the Class M cruisers were ever completed. Though the M-class cruiser design wasn't good enough for the Germans to actually finish the ship, the München in-game is a really potent ship. As a gunboat with an extremely fast-firing set of nearly 6-inch guns, unlike a lot of ships, you are gifted with both very useful HE shells and extremely powerful AP shells. Both have their benefits and drawbacks though, the HE doing really low amounts of damage, but having improved penetration characteristics, guaranteeing that you can at least get some damage off of most shots that you take against every ship that you can face. The AP is extremely high damage, but like all German shells, tends to have poor penetration characteristics at range, so you will need to be able to switch between these two in order to make the most out of München. With a 5-second reload, the ship doesn't make that decision require a great deal of forethought though, or really any forethought at all. Also making the München really comfortable to play is the high speed and reasonable turning circle and rudder shift time. This allows you to zip around the map and get into positions to exploit your enemy's weaknesses pretty well, and get to caps quickly, or just run away. And running away is a thing that you probably will want to do from time to time, because the Munchen is really quite squishy. It's not the type of boat that you'll want to get into many close quarters engagements with. While the Munchen does have a turtleback with a reasonably thick 30mm plate and has at least a chance to bounce up to 16-inch shells, there is always the chance that maybe you just don't get quite so lucky. If you step out in front of a battleship, things can go pretty poorly for you pretty quickly. That said, you don't really need to step out in front of a Massachusetts in order to have a short game in this particular boat, because you don't have a particularly impressive HP pool. You're just about likely to take damage every time someone bothers to shoot at you, limited only by how good their accuracy and dispersion happens to be. And some of the other stats here are not really going to help your long-term survivability either. While you aren't exactly the glowing neon billboard that Russian cruisers tend to be, you are more noticeable than average, which tends to translate into you gathering up a little extra attention. And to that extent, if this is sometime in the future that you're watching it, the Munchen is noted as having a fairly meh AA suite for a light cruiser at Tier 6, at least on PC. And if that translates over, it will mean that you will probably gain a little extra attention from attack aircraft. Overall, this tends to mean that the Munchen feels pretty formidable as a ship. She's a ship with great offensive capability, but a ship that tends to give away devastating strikes if played too aggressively. Still, the vulnerability does feel fair in the Munchen because you have the speed and, by and large, the profile of a ship that can at least control some portion of its fate, even in a Tier 7 game. Now, we're moving into commanders, and with that, before we start this off, we do have to acknowledge that though you will have some choices here to make, any choice that you will make will mean, almost certainly, that you'll have better speed than you already do in a stock Munchen. So all of these commanders enjoy this kind of benefit. Moving first then into Karl von Müller, he's probably your first and second best choice, because it really is a question of how much range and how much fire chance do you want. Since this ship will spend a lot of time shooting HE, and the HE damage is fairly unimpressive, the ability to increase your fire percentage from 8 to 11% with some extra range, or 13% with standard range, is going to increase your damage potential the most. Refill station can also be used here in order to increase your rate of fire, which will be helpful in both doing damage with AP and HE shots, as well as the number of fires you're likely to get over time. One disadvantage here is that he offers little in the way of maneuverability options beyond his base trait, so when it comes to just dodge, you might find that battleships will hit you relatively easily, and considering the amount of HE spam that you can put out in this ship, you may find they are very motivated to try to do that. If you don't use von Müller, then Reinhard Scheer, the base commander, probably offers you the second best of everything. With Burn It Down, increasing your fire chance to 10%, the ability to have the lowest concealment with easy double and potentially triple concealment builds, Beyond Range will give you a relatively trivial increase to your range, but it is still an increase. And overall, I'd say he's actually not a bad pick. That leaves Gunther Lutyens, who's ordinarily just about my favorite because of the improved survivability that he offers, and he gives German cruisers really buttery turret traverse. You can still get that out of him here, but the turret traverse on the Munchen isn't bad, and since this isn't a brawler, the ranges where you're going to be fighting usually don't require more responsive guns. You could switch out Ingenious here for Burn It Down and get the same fire potential as you would with Scheer, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, even if it hurts me to say it. But otherwise, using his other traits here to shave down the amount of damage you take is a perfectly reasonable way to play the Munchen. All three of these choices are doable. For stats, we'll probably just talk about the Munchen versus the field, because it isn't like the York at all, except for the occasional survival problems. And the Munchen really does have at least as much in common with the Atlanta, and that still doesn't feel like a really good basis for comparison. For survivability, the Munchen starts with 30,200 hit points, which is noticeably lower than average, and her armor profile is listed as 13 to 100 millimeters of armor. Looking briefly at the armor layout, you're informed instantly that a lot more of this ship is closer to the 13mm than to the 100, and what little you have for thick armor is pretty much limited to your turrets, a belt which thankfully extends a pretty decent amount over the ship and even over the back of it, and somewhat inconveniently the bottom of your boat. Everything else here is going to take a lot of penetration damage from most shells that can hit you. It's not all bad news here though. Your bow is 16mm, so against somewhat scarier heavy cruisers, you can bounce 8-inch shells as long as you're nose onto them. And you do have a turtleback with a 30mm plate, sloped at a pretty decent angle. This protects a very large portion of your ship and an extremely strangely shaped citadel that is a nightmare in every other way. Shells that come in directly through the front or the back of your ship are going to easily find their way into this, and the weak citadel roof isn't going to protect you against much of anything. And though I didn't have the motivation or the opportunity to try, I'm fairly certain you might even pick up 1 or 2 odd citadels from some battleships shooting HE, particularly the Nelson. So the short story is, at close range, going broadside and praying might actually be your most effective short-term survival tactic, emphasis on short-term, against battleships, and at range you really do just need to dodge. Against cruisers though, you can more or less hold your own, though the careful application of range and angles is also useful here. For artillery, you have 4 turrets which each mount to 150mm guns. These range out to a fairly average 14.8 kilometer range. Your reload speed is 5 seconds, which is superb. In fact, it has the exact same base reload as the Flint and Atlanta. Your 20-second turret traverse is more than 20% faster than average, meaning that the turrets feel good even if they don't feel incredibly fast. The HE damage here is listed at just 1700 damage, which is to say really unimpressive, but it does have 1/4 penetration with German HE. This means she'll get damage rolls against 37mm surfaces rather than the 25 or so that most 6-inch cruisers out there get. And unless you're hitting a battleship's turrets or the main belt, this means that the München tends to always walk away with something. The AP shells here do 3,750 damage, which isn't a really high number on its own, but when you combine that with the high rate of fire, that means that the München has the best armor penetration damage per minute at tier 6, beating out every cruiser with 6-inch guns or larger, and being able to out DPM almost every tier 7 cruiser in the game as well. But due to the fall off in penetration, it's probably something you only want to shoot at poorly angled targets and generally at things no further than medium range. The München does come with torpedoes. These are pretty much the factory standard German torpedoes that every German cruiser has. They're short range at 6 kilometers, they do a fairly middling 13,700 damage, and travel at a reasonable 64 knot speed. You have a quad launcher on each side, so less torpedoes than you'll find on ships like the Nürnberg, York, or Hipper, but you're also not likely to want to get into the kind of ranges where you can shoot these at any sort of targets that are paying any sort of attention to you. What they are extremely good at is guarding corners and convincing bigger, badder ships that they really don't want to push against you because you can cut them deep if they do. In short, maybe you're just not worth the trouble. Next is maneuverability, which is all around pretty good for München. This 36 knot speed is fast on its own, technically the fastest on paper for any tier 6 ship right now, and likely to be even faster based on your commander selections. For a fast cruiser, the 690 meter turning circle is pretty nice, since her closest rivals in terms of speed tend to have around 100 meters, or quite a bit more, wider turning circles. And this 8.3 second rudder shift is nothing incredible, but it is about half a second better than average, so again, overall, this is just excellent. Finishing off with concealment, the München is pretty noticeable for a small, fast light cruiser, being about 400 meters more noticeable than the average at the tier. But you are 500 meters less noticeable than the York, the tier 6 German tech tree ship, so it's not as pronounced a disadvantage as a lot of other German ships. This disadvantage is a little less pronounced from the air, though this 6.1 kilometer firing penalty while firing in smoke is very high, at least for a light cruiser. Quickly, we'll talk about consumables. This is exactly what you would get on the York. You have a very German sonar consumable. This gives you excellent range on detecting ships, as well as a pretty impressive torpedo detection. Your low HE shell damage might not make you a really great candidate for dealing with destroyers, but they're still going to enjoy seeing you in close range less than you'll probably enjoy seeing them because of it. You also have access to a catapult fighter, which has absolutely nothing noteworthy about it as far as I can tell. And as we get into the gameplay, I'm going to be on Two Brothers. Apparently I forgot to record the first few seconds of the actual game, so I guess you're missing out a lot there. But I will go ahead and put my commander up on the screen so we can talk a little bit about that. As you can see, we're using Karl von Müller. I will make a little note of the equipment choice here. I'm also using the propulsion mod as opposed to the rudder shift mod. And obviously we also have the concealment mod in slot 3. In either case, you could probably switch out those for rudder. You could probably do it with both. I'm not 100% sure that is either necessary or wise, but I personally like to get a little bit closer to my targets than some other folks. Maybe not always advisable in this ship, but one thing you will find if you do play this ship without the propulsion mod is that it really accelerates pretty slowly. So I actually think in terms of its maneuverability, it's excellent already. Fixing that acceleration issue is really a bigger deal for me than improving my already pretty decent rudder shift. In any case, what you're seeing here is I've already taken up a position here overlooking the back of the map. We are kind of sitting behind this island to see if anybody is exceptionally brave and decides to just sail out into the middle of that thing. Guns a-blazing, you never know. But for the most part, people have gotten a little bit more intelligent about not doing that. So the early part of this game always ends up being kind of the hunt and peck with the destroyers. As you can see, the Udachi has appeared in the wild, and he's sailing behind that island. This gives me an excellent opportunity, both because I'm asked, but also because I'm a good candidate for doing it. Even though I don't do an intense amount of HE shell damage with each hit, to go looking for him. I am going to be able to get pretty close to him by the time that he notices me. And as you can see, we easily attain 35 knots. That's going to be a problem for Udachi, which isn't that much faster than that. And we continue to accelerate. He's moving towards us. We're moving towards him. He probably doesn't have better than 4.3 kilometer concealment. I'm not sure what the lowest is, but at this point he's well within the opportunity where he can get away. Even though we have a pretty quick rate of fire, you can see it does take several attempts to actually finish him off. But we do manage to do that pretty easily. I think he knew he was dead to rights because essentially he can't run away from me. I have sonar, which I obviously popped there, helped me locate those torpedoes as soon as they were launched. And if he had even bothered with the smoke screen, we would have never lost contact with him. We'd have just continued to shoot every 5 or so seconds. So Munchen, if you get an opportunity like that, you are pretty good at it. In this case, he was far enough away from his support that I'm not too worried about being shot by his teammates. And based on the scouting that our destroyer is doing, I'm going to make a somewhat aggressive move for what is essentially a ship that is usually best played as a flanker or as a support ship behind folks. But if I can get up to this island here, I should have some ability to actually rain some fire down on the ships in the backfield. This wouldn't be a bad time to have a little extra range, but obviously we have gone for maximum fire potential. As you can see, with our speed, we're maintaining, even in turns, a speed that most cruisers would be completely happy with driving in a straight line. Now I'm getting myself in a position where hopefully I can shoot at that Iowa without him noticing me. I mean, obviously he'll probably take some notice of the fact that I'm here. We're aiming at the deck line, hoping that we hit superstructure. For some reason, these are all falling a little bit short. So I adjust my aim a little bit. And now you can see getting a shot out there every 5 seconds is as annoying in this ship as it can often be when being shot by an Atlanta. You have quite a bit better ballistics, meaning at this range you honestly can't even shoot at an Iowa and an Atlanta. You might be able to do it with a Flint, but you'd be doing it with a 20-second flight time. That makes this a little bit better of a pyromaniac, because you can actually use the ability as opposed to it being theoretically useful. The Flint's really, really hard to hit anything with. Lance is hard enough at range. Flint is darn near impossible, except if they're AFK or, close enough. The Munchen is actually pretty easy, pretty doable, because it has decent shell arcs, even though once you get to about 10 kilometers, the shells do get a little floaty. Now this is what I was talking about when we were talking about the torpedoes. The torpedoes on this ship are the short range, decent damage torpedoes that most German cruisers have. That tends to make them, as I put it, the most dangerous cruisers inside of 6 kilometers. And this Iowa is at least trying to help out his teammate by pushing me. Unfortunately, Iowa's not a really great ship to push me in, just because his maneuverability is... It's bad enough that he's going to find it pretty hard to adjust once he actually sees those. Most of the time people use the engine mod or propulsion mod to kind of slam on the brakes. I am baiting him around this island just a little bit by allowing him to see me, but still backing into cover. He does manage to take 2 torpedoes. I'm sure he's not thinking about it as how he has managed to accomplish something. But he continues to push. Obviously, he is going to use his damage control. I think he's probably going to start accelerating again. And at this point, it is go time. It's go time for 2 reasons. The first of which is I don't want to be here when that thing comes around the corner. And the other thing is, as you can see back in our cap, we have a couple of things going on, and I am just about the best ship to actually go back and defend the base. I have excellent speed, and other than a destroyer, you will not find a ship more suited at tier 6 to responding to capture situations in a timely fashion. There you can see how much the American battleships care about any of the armor on my ship. We take a nice big chunk of damage, but we have weathered it. Maybe we got 1 or 2 lucky bounces there off of our turtleback armor scheme, but obviously if you get a bad roll, one thing you need to realize in the Munchen, and this is the reason you don't want to be close to battleships like that, is your game can end. Your game can end really quickly. One of the things you can do is try to game mechanic some of them by being so close that even if they shoot you, You might get some bounces off of your turtleback. That requires you to completely offer yourself up to RNG, and sometimes that doesn't feel great. But anyway, we're getting a little bit sidetracked because what we're doing right now is trying to respond to the base, and as you can see, we are pushing 38 knots, which is incredibly fast for a German cruiser. It's incredibly fast for any cruiser, other than maybe a French one using its speed boost. As I'm rounding this corner, I know that what we've got in there is a cruiser. It is the Kutuzov. I switch over to AP because I really wanted to show off what the AP can do. Unfortunately, he's nose into me. So what I have to do is switch back to the HE. There are probably very few places that I can hit the Kutuzov where this isn't going to do some damage. So against a well-angled target, we're going to just continue to shoot the HE, even though if he was going more broadside like that at the end, you can get 6,000-8,000 damage salvos with the AP pretty easily, even on tier 7 cruisers. So it's a really, really nice tool to have in your pocket. The rest of the time, you're probably going to be shooting HE. You're probably going to be hoping for fires, and that's kind of what the München does. In any case, we have popped our hydro just in case he had launched some torpedoes. He didn't. That's a little too bad that he got as far around as he did, because we probably wanted to save it until we got spotted by this other destroyer. We can push out and kind of try to herd him away from the base. We're not going to want to get too far away so that we can respond to it if he manages to get around us. But as you see, he's on the top side of the map anyway, and we're really not going to have any impact on the rest of this game whatsoever. So as this is wrapping up, I'll just move into my closing thoughts for the München. I find this ship to be really a joy to play. She has the speed to affect the flow of the game, and no matter what situation you find yourself in, you do feel like you always have at least something that you can do for your team. Like other tier 6 premium cruisers, and cruisers in general for that matter, you're prone to being given a quick ticket back to port, particularly against some of those tier 7 American battleships. But in this ship, I do feel like you have at least a little control over your fate, rather than the ordinary just dodge, or in the case of many of the tier 6 premium cruisers, just don't get shot at all. In short, I really felt like I could help myself have a good game by making good decisions, go figure. But just about every time that I got deleted, I could lean back and say, yeah, that's totally fair. That makes sense. And I can't say that I can always say that in every tier 6 premium cruiser. So overall, Munchen just feels good. It's always doing some damage with HE. Can be a little troll if you're not getting fires. You can end up with a lot of hits and very little damage to show for it, because you do have a decent but not incredible fire chance. If you do get a chance to use your AP, which unfortunately we didn't really get to see in this game, and this is the one reason I don't really love this replay, it can be really, really punishing. And even in those situations where you're completely backed into a corner, the torpedoes here are going to make people think twice, either before they attack you or afterwards, wondering if it was really worth it. So just a really solid little light cruiser. In any case, those are my thoughts on the München. Hope you've all enjoyed this little review, and as always, I do hope to see you on the next one.